The thunderous roar of jet engines shook the airfield as morning light glinted off sleek metal wings. Heat waves rippled above the tarmac, while mechanics scurried between aircraft like worker bees. Captain Sophia Reynolds stood alone beside her. F-16 Falcon, watching as the squadron's newer F-35s took priority positions on the flight line. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun beat down on Holloway Air Force Base's main runway as Captain Sophia Reynolds ran her weathered hands along the fuselage of her F-16C Fighting Falcon. The aircraft, nicknamed Phoenix, had been manufactured before Sophia was even born. Its once pristine paint now showed patches of wear, its metal skin bearing the scars of decades of service. Unlike the gleaming F-35 Lightning IIs that dominated the flight line, Phoenix looked like a relic from another era. "Hey Grandma," the Air and Space Museum called. "They want their exhibit back," Lieutenant Colonel James Harrington shouted as he walked past, his flight suit crisp and immaculate, the F-35 squadron patch prominently displayed on his shoulder. The small group of pilots walking with him erupted in laughter. Sophia didn't respond. After 15 years in the Air Force and 3 combat tours, she'd learned that engaging with the base's golden boy only encouraged him. Instead, she continued her pre-flight check, mentally running through the systems of the aircraft she'd flown for the past decade. Sophia had earned her spot in the 142nd Tactical Fighter Wing through exceptional piloting skills and flawless performance in combat situations. Back home in Arizona, her grandfather, a former Vietnam-era fighter pilot who passed away when she was 14, had taught her everything about aviation before she could even drive a car. "You don't fly to prove a point, Sophia," he'd always told her. "You fly to protect the people who can't protect themselves." But here at Holloway, surrounded by next-generation pilots and their 5th-generation aircraft, those lessons felt distant. The whispers started the moment she arrived at the base 6 months ago, when the military decided to keep a small contingent of F-16s operational, alongside the newer F-35s. "Hey Vintage, sure you don't want to trade up for something built this century," they'd call. "Hope those analog gauges don't confuse you too much." The worst of them was Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, the F-35 squadron commander, who made it his personal mission to remind Sophia daily that she and her aircraft were obsolete relics wasting valuable hangar space. Harrington had a way of scheduling briefings when he knew she'd be performing maintenance, ensuring she'd arrive late and disheveled. "I don't get it," he said that morning as the pilots gathered for the day's mission briefing. "We've got the most advanced fighters in the world, and headquarters saddles us with Cold War leftovers and their pilots." His eyes found Sophia as she entered the room. "Some traditions need to end." Sophia's face remained neutral as she took her seat. She'd learned early that reacting only gave them more ammunition. Instead, she focused on the mission parameters, on the familiar feel of her flight suit, on the aerial maneuvers she would perform during today's joint exercise. "Say what you want," she replied quietly, eyes fixed on her briefing materials. "But when it counts, I'll be there." Harrington chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "This isn't the Gulf War, Reynolds. Modern air combat requires modern solutions. Your ride belongs in a museum, not on my flight line." The other pilots snickered, but Sophia tuned them out. She had work to do. Operation Red Flag was brutal. 3 weeks of the most realistic air combat training in the world. Only the best pilots were invited to participate, and only the most skilled would earn top recognition. The rest would return to their units with bruised egos and valuable lessons. As Sophia walked toward her aircraft, she caught a glimpse of the small photograph taped inside her helmet bag. Her grandfather in his flight suit standing proudly beside his F-4 Phantom. The same determined eyes she saw in the mirror every morning. He'd believed in her when no one else would. Now she was here, exactly where she belonged, even if everyone else couldn't see it yet. The morning exercises began with basic intercept missions, F-35s, playing the role of aggressors while the F-16s defended key airspace. Sophia watched as Harrington took off first, his F-35 climbing with impressive speed, its advanced systems already plotting the most efficient attack vector. When Sophia's turn came, the tower seemed to delay her clearance just a bit longer than necessary. She could feel eyes on her, waiting for her to make a mistake, hoping for validation of their prejudices. She settled into her cockpit, ran through her pre-flight checklist, and let everything else fade away. Phoenix might be older, but in Sophia's hands, the F-16 moved like an extension of her body. While the F-35 pilots relied heavily on their advanced sensor suites and computer systems, Sophia flew by feel, by instinct honed through thousands of flight hours. During the first engagement, she managed to evade 2 F-35s and score a simulated kill on a third, before finally being shot down by Harrington himself. As she landed and taxied back to the hangar, she could see it in their faces, surprise, confusion, and in Harrington's case, something that looked dangerously close to anger. "Lucky break, Reynolds," he said as they debriefed. "But luck runs out. Tomorrow we'll see what happens when we engage with full electronic warfare suites activated." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Sophia packed away her gear, she knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, harder tests, and more opportunities for her fellow pilots to remind her she didn't belong. But she also knew something they didn't. She wasn't going anywhere. Week 2 of Red Flag brought advanced combat scenarios, and Lieutenant Colonel Harrington wasted no time establishing the pecking order. During the morning briefing, he announced team assignments for the upcoming mixed formation exercise, a critical test, where different aircraft would need to work together to overcome a simulated enemy force with superior numbers. "Johnson, you're with Williams," Harrington called out, pairing 2 of the program's top F-35 pilots. "Ramirez, take Davidson. Chun, you've got Miller." Sophia waited as the teams formed around her, knowing what was coming but hoping she'd be wrong. "Reynolds," Harrington finally said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of disdain. "You're with me." The announcement sent a ripple of uncomfortable whispers through the briefing room. Everyone knew Harrington had specifically requested Sophia as his wingman, not to help her succeed, but to ensure she'd fail under his watch. "Problem with that assignment, Captain?" Harrington asked, noting her hesitation. "No problem, sir," Sophia replied evenly. She'd expected this eventually. Harrington wasn't content to just mock her from a distance. He wanted front-row seats to her downfall. The mixed formation exercise began at 0900 hours. Each team had 90 minutes to penetrate enemy airspace, strike 4 targets, and return to friendly territory without being shot down by the aggressor squadron, playing the role of enemy fighters. Sophia suggested they use the mountains to mask their approach, taking advantage of the F-16's superior maneuverability in the canyons, while using the F-35's stealth capabilities for the final approach to the targets. "Negative," Harrington said. "Immediately. We're going high and fast." The F-35 was designed to dominate from altitude. "Sir, respectfully, that approach leaves us exposed to their long-range radar. They'll be waiting for us." Harrington's voice turned cold over the radio. "Reynolds, I've been flying combat missions since you were doing touch-and-goes in basic training. We're taking my route, and you're going to follow my lead without question. Are we clear?" Sophia bit back her response. Military hierarchy was absolute, even when it was wrong. "Clear, sir." The exercise proved disastrous, exactly as Sophia had predicted. Within 40 minutes, they were shot down by aggressor aircraft that had been waiting at exactly the altitude and approach vector Harrington had insisted on using. As they flew back to base, defeated, Harrington made sure his voice carried to the other teams over the common frequency. "Some platforms just aren't suited for modern combat," he announced. "Takes more than an experienced pilot to win today's wars. You need advanced sensors and stealth capabilities, and that's something you either have or you don't." Sophia said nothing, but inside she burned with frustration. She'd known the correct approach, had tried to voice it professionally, and been shut down. Now Harrington was using their failure, his failure, as evidence of her aircraft's inadequacy. Back at the base that evening, she overheard several conversations about her performance. "Maybe she's good in basic engagements, but modern air combat is different," one pilot said. "Harrington has a point about fifth-generation capabilities." Sophia sat in the pilot's lounge, reviewing mission data on her tablet, her grandfather's dog tags worn around her neck. "You fly to protect people who can't protect themselves," he had always told her. But what happened when the people you were meant to fly alongside wouldn't let you help them? She was beginning to understand that. This wasn't just about proving her piloting skills. Harrington and others like him weren't just testing her ability, they were actively working to undermine it. And tomorrow would bring new opportunities for them to continue their campaign. But Captain Sophia Reynolds had not come this far to give up now. If they wanted to play games, she'd learn to win at their level. By the final week of Red Flag, Harrington had perfected his campaign of systematic undermining. It wasn't just the snide comments anymore. He'd evolved into something more calculated and dangerous. During aircraft inspections, he'd find microscopic flaws in Sophia's F-16 that he'd overlook in other aircraft. In briefing sessions on electronic warfare and missile evasion tactics, he'd single her out with impossible scenario questions designed to make her stumble. "Reynolds," he'd call out during a lecture on radar jamming techniques, "you've got 4 bandits at your 6, 2 more at your 10 o'clock, all firing active radar missiles. Your countermeasures are depleted, your wingman is hit, and you're flying an aircraft with the radar cross-section of a barn door. Walk me through your survival strategy in 15 seconds or less." Even seasoned weapons school graduates would need time to work through that scenario, but Sophia had learned to stay sharp under pressure. She'd provide a solution, usually viable, only to have Harrington find some minor technical point to critique. "Close, but you forgot that the F-16's older EW suite can't differentiate between multiple radar types simultaneously. In a real situation, that's a miss that gets people killed." The other pilots began to see Sophia as a liability, not because of her actual performance. Her flying skills remained among the best in the exercise, but because Harrington's constant criticism created an atmosphere of doubt around her. If their commander had no confidence in the F-16's capabilities, maybe they shouldn't either. The isolation was the hardest part. During meals, conversations would quiet when she approached tables. Planning sessions formed without her. When simulator time was distributed, she'd find herself last in line, receiving whatever time slots were left over. But it was Captain Ryan Chun who finally said what others were thinking during a break between missions. Sophia overheard him talking to a group of pilots near the operations desk. "Look, I'm not saying anything against legacy aircraft," Chun was saying, his voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who'd rehearsed this speech. "It's just that when missiles are flying and lives are on the line, you want to know the platform next to you can handle the threat environment. And if Harrington has concerns about the F-16's capabilities, maybe there's a reason." Another pilot agreed. "Guy's got 4 combat deployments. If he thinks those older jets are outmatched, there's probably something to it." Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Harrington wasn't just trying to break her anymore. He was turning her potential teammates against her. In combat, trust was everything. A fighter squadron required absolute confidence in each other's abilities and equipment. Without that trust, the mission failed before it began. That evening, she found an unmarked envelope in her locker. Inside was a printed memo, unsigned. Do yourself a favor. Request transfer before your obsolete aircraft gets someone killed. Sophia stared at the paper for a long time, then carefully folded it and placed it in her flight suit pocket alongside her grandfather's dog tags. Someone wanted her to believe she was alone, that everyone agreed she didn't belong. But she'd noticed something they probably hadn't. During the high-stress scenarios, when electronic warfare systems were at full power and communication was deliberately degraded to simulate combat conditions, her performance remained consistently excellent while others faltered. The F-35 pilots, so reliant on their advanced systems, struggled when those systems were compromised. Sophia, flying by instinct and raw skill, actually improved under stress. The next morning brought news that changed everything. The exercise commander announced that in 3 days, the final phase of Red Flag would involve a massive, theater-wide combat scenario with over 100 aircraft from multiple nations. This exercise will determine who's truly elite, the commander explained. You'll be evaluated not just on kill counts, but on tactical decision-making, leadership under pressure, and team coordination. Sophia looked around the briefing room and saw the excitement on her fellow pilots' faces. This was what they'd all been training for, the chance to prove themselves in conditions as close to all-out war as possible. Harrington caught her eye from across the room and smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. Sophia realized with crystal clarity that the real test wouldn't be the exercise itself. It would be surviving whatever Harrington had planned for her when they were in the chaos of 100 aircraft engagement with no real oversight. But she also realized something else. This was her opportunity to prove once and for all that she belonged here, not to Harrington, not to her doubters, but to herself. The night before the final exercise, Sophia sat in the darkened simulator room, running scenario after scenario. She'd studied every detail of the battle space, every potential threat, every approach vector. Harrington found her there at 0100 hours. Burning the midnight oil, Reynolds? He slid into the seat beside her, his voice carrying that familiar mockery. Worried about tomorrow? Just preparing, sir. Sophia kept her eyes on the simulator screen, refusing to take the bait. You know, I've been thinking about the squadron. Assignments for tomorrow's exercise. Harrington leaned back in his chair, studying her. Command's giving me some discretion in how we organize the flights. Sophia looked up, something in his tone setting off alarm bells. I could put you with Chun or Davidson, pilots who might carry you through the mission. Harrington's smile was cold. Or I could make sure you're placed where your performance really matters, where there's no room for antiquated technology or second-rate capabilities. I don't need anyone to carry me, sir. We'll see about that. Harrington stood up. Because tomorrow, Reynolds, you're going to find out what happens when your obsolete fighter faces modern threats. When it's just you, your outdated avionics, and a sky full of enemies with better technology and better pilots. He paused at the door. Hope you've made peace with the limitations of that museum piece you call an aircraft, because in about 18 hours, everyone's going to see exactly what it's capable of, and what it's not. After he left, Sophia sat alone in the darkness, her hands gripping the simulator controls tightly. For months, she'd endured the mockery, the isolation, the systematic attempts to undermine her confidence. She told herself it was just part of the process, that proving herself would eventually silence the doubters. But Harrington's words felt different. They carried the weight of a promise, not just a threat. Tomorrow, in the chaos of the largest exercise of the year, with dozens of aircraft filling the sky and electronic warfare systems jamming communications, he would have the opportunity to ensure her failure permanently. Sophia thought about the unsigned memo in her locker, about the conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, about the growing conviction among her squadron mates that her F-16 was a liability. She could request a transfer, medical leave, find some honorable way to disappear before tomorrow's exercise. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Harrington would get what he wanted, and she'd be alive to find another path forward. But as Sophia sat in that empty simulator room, surrounded by screens showing the battlefield where her fate would be decided, she realized something fundamental had changed inside her. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by something stronger, a cold, steady anger that burned like jet fuel. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to give Harrington the satisfaction of watching her quit, and she wasn't going to let her grandfather's legacy be tainted by her surrender. Tomorrow, in the largest air combat exercise in the world, with real consequences for her career and reputation, Sophia Reynolds would find out exactly what she and Phoenix were made of, and so would everyone else. She powered down the simulator, gathered her notes, and walked back to her quarters. In 6 hours, the pilots would gather for final briefing. In 12 hours, the aircraft would launch. In 18 hours, everything would change. Sophia spent the remaining time before dawn checking and double-checking every system on Phoenix. Each inspection point, each gauge, each backup procedure was methodically verified. She loaded her mission data, checked her emergency protocols, and prepared for what might be her final flight as an Air Force fighter pilot. But deep inside, beneath the fear and anticipation, a quiet voice whispered that this wasn't an ending at all. This was the moment she'd been training for her entire life, not just as a pilot, but as a warrior who'd never been given permission to exist. Tomorrow, she'd stop asking for permission. The pilots gathered at dawn in the largest briefing room on base, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Maps of the entire training range covered the walls, showing the vast battle space where over 100 aircraft would soon engage in the most realistic combat simulation possible. Sophia sat with her back straight, mission folder in her lap, watching as squadron leaders outlined the complex scenario awaiting them. Across from her, Harrington lounged with practiced ease, making jokes with the other F-35 pilots that seemed designed to exclude her. "This is where we separate the 5th gen from the fossils," Harrington announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "Time to see what really owns the sky." Sophia didn't react. She'd spent the flight briefing studying the mission parameters and electronic warfare frequencies, memorizing threat zones and emergency protocols. While Harrington played to his audience, she was preparing for war. The exercise scenario was complex, a simulated international crisis with multiple nations involved. Blue forces, which included American, British, and Canadian aircraft, would defend against an aggressor red force played by specialized USAF and Allied squadrons. Over 20 naval vessels would provide additional threats and complications. The battlefield stretched across 15,000 square miles of Nevada desert, with simulated missile launches, electronic warfare, and even cyber attacks on command networks. Sophia found herself assigned to Eagle Flight under Harrington's direct command, exactly as he'd promised. The flight included 4 F-35s and her lone F-16. Their mission was to penetrate heavily defended airspace and strike a high-value target, a simulated enemy command center, before withdrawing safely. "Reynolds, you're on rear security," Harrington ordered during the final briefing. "Don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Let the real warfighters handle the primary targets." Sophia nodded without argument. She'd expected this. Harrington wanted her relegated to the least important role, set up to fail when her limited responsibilities proved insufficient. But Sophia had studied the mission terrain extensively, and she knew something Harrington didn't. Rear security would position her perfectly to observe the entire formation's movement and react to threats he might not anticipate. 6 hours into the operation, Eagle Flight had successfully penetrated the outer defensive perimeter. They were making good time toward the target when Sophia's radar warning receiver suddenly screamed with alerts. Her eyes widened as she processed the information. Eagle lead, this is Eagle 5, she called, using her mission call sign. Multiple radar spikes, bearing 03-02045. Looks like a coordinated intercept. Maintain position 5, Harrington replied dismissively. My systems aren't showing any significant threats, probably simulator ghosts. Sophia frowned. Her older F-16 didn't have the advanced sensor. Fusion of the F-35, but its individual warning systems were still highly reliable. She checked her radar again, confirming what she'd seen. Lead, I'm showing at least 6 bandits approaching in combat spread. Recommend immediate defensive maneuvers. Reynolds, Harrington's voice hardened. I said maintain position. The F-35's sensor suite costs more than your entire aircraft. If I'm not seeing threats, they're not there. 20 seconds later, missile launch warnings blared across all frequencies as a squadron of aggressor F-16s painted to resemble Russian Su-35s crested the ridgeline and launched a coordinated attack. Eagle flight scattered under the assault, their perfect formation disintegrating as simulated missiles tracked them from multiple angles. Eagle flight, break formation. Defensive maneuvers, Harrington shouted, too late. Sophia was already moving, her F-16 rolling into a tight turn that strained against the limits of the airframe. While the F-35 pilots struggled to transition from cruise to combat, Phoenix responded instantly to her commands, decades of refined aerodynamics allowing the fighter to pull turns that would crush a pilot without Sophia's experience and physical conditioning. 5, you've got 2 on your 6. Called Captain Chun, his voice strained as he tried to evade his own pursuers. Sophia didn't respond verbally. Her full attention was on flying, on survival. She pulled Phoenix into a steep climb, then cut power and kicked rudder, causing the fighter to stall momentarily and slide sideways in a maneuver no flight manual endorsed. The pursuing aggressors, expecting her to continue climbing or dive, shot past her position, momentarily confused. In that brief window, Sophia regained control and dropped in behind the trailing aggressor, achieving a perfect firing solution before he could react. The exercise computer registered her simulated missile launch as a kill. 1 down. The second aggressor, realizing his vulnerability, broke hard right and dove for the deck. Sophia followed, her F-16 screaming toward the desert floor. At high speeds and low altitude, the F-16's handling advantages over newer, heavier fighters became pronounced. She closed the distance methodically, waiting for the perfect shot. Meanwhile, the rest of Eagle flight was in trouble. Harrington and 2 other F-35s had been killed already, their stealth capabilities neutralized by the surprise attack's perfect positioning. Only Chun remained, desperately trying to evade 3 pursuers. Sophia eliminated her second target with textbook precision, then immediately turned toward Chin's position. She found him surrounded, his F-35 performing admirably but ultimately outmatched by the aggressor's numerical advantage. Without hesitation, she pushed Phoenix to maximum thrust, closing the gap rapidly. She fired a simulated missile at the trailing aggressor, forcing him to break formation to evade. The disruption created just enough confusion for Chun to slip away from the remaining 2. Eagle 3, this is 5. Break right on my mark and head for the canyon. I'll cover you. Copy 5, Chun responded, the relief evident in his voice. Together, they executed a series of coordinated maneuvers that gradually separated them from their pursuers. Sophia repeatedly placed her F-16 between Chun's F-35 and the aggressors, using her superior dogfighting capability to keep him at bay while he recovered his situational awareness. Finally clear of immediate threats, they regrouped at low altitude. Reynolds, Eagle 5. Chun's voice had lost its earlier confidence. What now? The mission's blown. Sophia checked her tactical display. 3/4 of Blue Force's aircraft had been eliminated, but the primary target was still viable. According to the mission parameters, if they could still strike it, the exercise would be considered a partial success. "We continue the mission," she said firmly. "New approach, new tactics, but same objective. But it's just the two of us against their entire air defense network," Chun protested. Sophia's voice remained steady. "Sometimes two aircraft are enough if they're in the right place at the right time. Follow my lead and stay tight." Using terrain masking and flying through narrow canyons where radar coverage was spotty, Sophia led them on an approach path no mission planner would have authorized. The F-35 wasn't designed for the aggressive, low-altitude maneuvering she was asking of it, but Chun did his best to keep pace. "How did you know they were coming?" Chun asked during a rare quiet moment. "My systems didn't register the threat until they were practically on top of us." "Experience," Sophia replied simply. "And an old-school RWR that doesn't try to interpret the data before showing it to me. Sometimes simpler is better." They approached the target from the least defended angle, using a mountain range to shield their approach. When they finally popped up to attack, the defenders had only seconds to react. 3. Use your stealth and advanced weapons to take the primary target, Sophia ordered. "I'll keep their air defenses busy," while Chun's F-35 slipped through. To deliver a precision strike on the command center, Sophia deliberately made herself the most visible target in the area. She jammed defensive radars, launched decoys, and executed a series of aggressive maneuvers that forced every defender to focus on her rather than searching for the stealthier F-35. By the time they realized the deception, Chun had already destroyed the target and was withdrawing. Sophia, having completed her diversion, executed a series of high G-turns that no pursuer could match, then disappeared into a narrow canyon before emerging 50 miles away, completely clear of enemy forces. Against all odds, they had accomplished the mission objective. When they landed back at Holloway, the debriefing room was unusually quiet. Harrington sat with the other killed pilots, his expression unreadable as the exercise controllers reviewed the mission data. Eagle Flight suffered 60% casualties, but achieved the primary mission objective, the controller announced. This was the only Blue Force element to successfully strike its designated target. He looked up from his notes. "Captain Reynolds, Captain Chun, excellent work out there today." The room remained silent for a long moment. Then one pilot began to applaud, followed by another, and soon most of the room had joined in. It wasn't just courtesy, it was genuine recognition that what they had accomplished was remarkable. Everyone except Harrington, who sat with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the mission replay showing Sophia's F-16 outmaneuvering aircraft that should have easily defeated it. After the formal debriefing, Chun approached Sophia as she gathered her gear. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "What you did out there today, I've never seen flying like that." Sophia nodded, accepting his words without comment. "How did you learn to fly like that?" he pressed. "They don't teach those maneuvers at any school I've attended." Sophia considered the question carefully. "They don't teach them because they can't. You can't learn that kind of flying from a manual or a simulator. You learn it by pushing yourself and your aircraft to the edge, by developing a connection with your machine that goes beyond checklists and procedures." Chun looked skeptical. The F-35 is designed to avoid those situations entirely. Its systems are supposed to keep us out of close-range dogfights. "And what happens when those systems fail?" Sophia challenged. "What happens when the enemy doesn't play by your rulebook?" Today could have been a slaughter, but we salvaged it because one of us knew how to fly when technology wasn't enough. The realization seemed to dawn on Chun slowly. "You're saying we've become too dependent on our technology." "I'm saying there's value in both approaches," Sophia corrected. "Your F-35 did what my F-16 never could when you made that final strike. But my F-16 did what your F-35 couldn't during the initial ambush. The problem isn't the aircraft, it's pilots who think their technology makes them invincible. Chun nodded thoughtfully. I have a lot to think about. Thank you, Captain Reynolds. As he walked away, Sophia noticed Harrington watching from across the hangar, his expression darker than she'd ever seen it. Today's events hadn't changed his mind, they'd only hardened his resolve. The second week of training intensified as the scenarios grew more complex. Harrington's campaign against Sophia evolved from mere undermining to active sabotage. During mission planning, he'd deliberately assign her aircraft to patrol empty sectors. During joint operations, he'd forget to include her in critical communications. When maintenance resources were allocated, Phoenix would mysteriously end up at the bottom of the priority list. Yet despite these obstacles, Sophia's reputation among the other pilots was changing. After witnessing her performance in the large force exercise, many began to seek her advice on dogfighting tactics and maneuvers that had fallen out of favor in the age of beyond visual range combat. Some even requested to fly with her during training sorties, eager to learn from her experience. This shift only intensified Harrington's resentment. During one particularly tense briefing, he interrupted Sophia as she explained a defensive tactic to a group of younger pilots. Don't waste your time with obsolete maneuvers, he said loudly. Modern air combat is about sensor fusion and network-centric warfare, not pulling high G turns like it's 1986. Sophia met his gaze calmly. With respect, sir, it's about both. Technology is a tool, not a replacement for skill. You're outdated. Perspective is dangerous, Reynolds, Harrington replied. It gives these pilots the false impression that they can dogfight their way out of situations that should be avoided entirely. The F-35 was designed to kill targets before they even know they're being tracked. And when that doesn't work, Sophia challenged. When the enemy has jamming or decoys or simply numbers, what then? The room fell silent, pilots looking between them with uncomfortable expressions. Harrington's face flushed with anger. Then we adapt using modern tactics, not throwbacks to a style of fighting that died with the Cold War. He turned to address the room. Flying an obsolete aircraft doesn't make you special, Reynolds. It makes you a liability to everyone who has to accommodate your limitations. He stormed out, leaving an awkward silence behind him. Gradually, the pilots returned to their discussions, but the tension remained palpable. Sophia continued her explanation without acknowledging the interruption, but inside, she was troubled. Harrington's hostility was escalating beyond professional disagreement into something more personal and dangerous. That evening, she found a second note in her locker. Some people will sacrifice anyone to protect their ego. Watch your six, Reynolds. Unlike the first note, this one wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Someone was concerned about Harrington's intentions. Sophia studied the handwriting, trying to identify who might have left it, but the block letters revealed nothing about their author. She was contemplating the message when her phone buzzed with a notification. The base commander had called an emergency briefing for the following morning. All pilots were required to attend. At 07:00 hours, the briefing room was filled to capacity. Colonel Margaret Wright, commander of Holloway Air Force Base, stood at the podium with an expression that immediately silenced the room. 3 hours ago, we received intelligence that changes everything, she began without preamble. A potential adversary has deployed a new electronic warfare system along our eastern training range. This system appears capable of disrupting or degrading F-35 sensor and communication capabilities. Murmurs spread through the room. Harrington sat forward, his attention locked on the colonel. While we assess the full implications of this development, we're implementing an immediate change to our training program, Colonel Wright continued. Starting today, all missions will include a mix of 4th and 5th generation aircraft, with an emphasis on maintaining combat effectiveness when advanced systems are degraded or compromised. She brought up a slide showing new squadron configurations. We're reorganizing into mixed flights. Each will be led by a pilot with extensive experience in both electronic warfare environments and visual air combat maneuvering. Sophia felt a surge of tension as her name appeared on the screen as Eagle Flight Leader, with Harrington listed as her second-in-command. The reversal of their positions could not have been more dramatic or more dangerous. This isn't a reflection on anyone's abilities, Colonel Wright added, noting the surprised expressions throughout the room. It's a tactical adjustment based on the current threat environment. I expect all of you to adapt accordingly. As the briefing ended, Sophia braced herself for Harrington's reaction. He approached with controlled fury, waiting until they were relatively isolated before speaking. "This is your doing, isn't it?" he hissed. "You've been undermining me to command, making me look incompetent while playing up your experienced aviator routine." "This has nothing to do with me," Sophia replied evenly. "It's about adapting to a new threat." "Convenient timing," Harrington scoffed. "Just when your obsolete flying style starts looking relevant again. Don't think for a second this changes anything, Reynolds. You might have command fooled, but I know what you really are. A pilot who couldn't cut it in the modern Air Force, clinging to an outdated aircraft because you lacked the skills for anything better." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Enjoy your moment in the sun. It won't last." As he walked away, Sophia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Harrington had just been professionally humiliated, his leadership questioned, his tactical approach undermined. A man like that would not simply accept the situation. He would find a way to reassert control, to prove his superiority. And now she would be flying with him daily, relying on him to follow her orders and support her decisions in the air. The potential for disaster was enormous. That afternoon, as Sophia prepared for her first mission as Eagle Flight Leader, she was surprised to find Captain Chun waiting by her aircraft. "Got a minute, Captain?" he asked. Sophia nodded, continuing her pre-flight inspection as they talked. "I wanted to warn you about Harrington," Chun said, keeping his voice low. "He's been making comments, gathering all eyes. He's convinced you manipulated command into this reorganization." "I had nothing to do with it," Sophia replied. "I know that," Chun assured her. "But he's building a narrative that you're using the current situation to push an agenda against fifth-gen aircraft and pilots. He's turning this into an us versus them situation." Sophia paused her inspection, giving Chun her full attention. "Why are you telling me this?" He hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "Because what you did out there saved my life. Because I've been watching you fly for 2 weeks, and I've learned more about real combat flying than in 3 years of F-35 training. And because Harrington is wrong about you and your aircraft." He handed her a folded piece of paper. "These are the names of pilots who think the same way. We've been talking, and we want you to know you're not alone in this fight." Sophia unfolded the paper to find a list of nearly 20 names, almost half the pilots in the program, including several F-35 drivers she'd assumed were firmly in Harrington's camp. "We're not against the F-35, Chun explained, seeing her. "Surprise! It's an incredible platform. But we're against the idea that technology alone wins wars. We've seen what you can do with an obsolete F-16, and it's made us question everything we've been taught about modern air combat." Sophia carefully folded the paper and tucked it into her flight suit. "Thank you, Chun. This means more than you know." He nodded, then hesitated again. "There's something else. Harrington has requested to fly as your wingman on tomorrow's mission. Command approved it just an hour ago." Sophia's expression remained neutral, but her mind raced with implications. A wingman was the most vulnerable position in any formation, completely dependent on the flight leader's decisions. It was also the position from which the most damage could be done if someone wanted to sabotage a mission. "He says he wants to learn from your experience, Chun added, making air quotes. Nobody believes that for a second. What do you think he's planning? Sophia asked. Chun shook his head. Nothing good. Just be careful up there. Some people will do anything to protect their reputation. After Chun left, Sophia completed her inspection with mechanical precision, but her mind was elsewhere. Tomorrow she would fly into simulated combat with Harrington directly behind her, watching her every move, waiting for any mistake or vulnerability. The danger wasn't physical. The training weapons couldn't cause actual damage, but professional. One significant error, one failed mission, and Harrington could use it to destroy her credibility permanently. That night, as she reviewed the mission parameters in her quarters, Sophia found herself staring at her grandfather's photograph. The old aviator looked back at her with eyes that had seen their own battles, their own struggles against those who underestimated him. What would you do? She whispered to the image. The answer came not in words but in memory, her grandfather taking her up in his small Cessna when she was just 12, letting her take the controls during a sudden summer storm when most pilots would have panicked. Fly your own aircraft, Sophia, he'd told her as rain lashed the windscreen. Don't fight the storm, don't ignore it, just fly through it. The storm doesn't care who you are or what you're flying. It only respects those who respect it. Sophia smiled at the memory. Harrington was just another storm to fly through, not against. She couldn't control his actions or intentions, but she could control her own aircraft, her own decisions. With renewed focus, she returned to her mission planning. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but she would face them as she always had, with skill, preparation, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what she and her aircraft could do. What Harrington didn't understand, what he might never understand, was that the greatest advantage in aerial combat wasn't technology or even experience. It was the absolute certainty that when everything went wrong, you could still depend on yourself, your training, and the aircraft beneath your hands. Tomorrow, in the skies above Nevada, he would learn that lesson the hard way. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when Sophia arrived at the flight line the next morning. Phoenix waited on the tarmac, freshly fueled and armed with training ordnance. Despite the early hour, a team of maintenance personnel swarmed around the F-16, performing last-minute checks with an enthusiasm Sophia hadn't seen before. We pulled an all-nighter on her, Captain, the crew chief explained, handing Sophia the inspection log. Triple-checked every system. She's flying better than the day she left the factory. Sophia reviewed the maintenance log, touched by their dedication. Thank you, this means a lot. The crew chief grinned. Word's gotten around about what you did in that big exercise. Figured you deserved an aircraft that's as ready as you are. Across the flight line, Harrington was conducting his own pre-flight check, his movements sharp and precise. When he saw Sophia watching, he offered a smile that never reached his eyes. Today's mission was ambitious, a deep strike against a heavily defended target, complicated by a simulated electronic warfare environment that would degrade communications and sensors. Eagle flight would need to penetrate defenses, deliver precision strikes, and exfiltrate while under constant pressure from aggressor aircraft and surface threats. The briefing room buzzed with tension as pilots reviewed the mission parameters. This was no ordinary training exercise. Command had increased the stakes dramatically. Intelligence had detected a new electronic warfare system that could potentially blind F-35s, and today's mission would test countermeasures against this emerging threat. Intelligence suggests this system can temporarily neutralize stealth capabilities and disrupt sensor fusion, Colonel Wright explained, pointing to the threat rings on the digital map. Your primary objective is to navigate through these zones and determine their effectiveness against our platforms. Sophia studied the flight plan carefully. As Eagle flight leader, she would guide 4 aircraft, her F-16 and 3 F-35s, including Harrington's through the densest electronic warfare environment ever simulated in training. It was a mission designed to push both aircraft and pilots to their absolute limits. "Captain Reynolds will take point," the colonel continued. "Lieutenant Colonel Harrington will fly as her wingman. This isn't about seniority today. It's about maximizing our combat effectiveness under these specific conditions." Harrington's face remained expressionless, but Sophia could feel his resentment radiating across the room. Being assigned as her wingman was a public acknowledgement that her experience in degraded electronic environments made her better suited to lead, a direct challenge to everything he represented. As they walked toward the flight line after briefing, Harrington fell into step beside her. His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "Enjoy your moment of glory, Reynolds. Command may think your dinosaur has value in this scenario, but we both know the truth. One exercise doesn't change the future of air combat." Sophia kept her eyes forward. "This isn't about me or you, sir. It's about finding the best way to counter a threat that affects all of us." "How noble," Harrington sneered. "Just remember, when we're up there and things get complicated, chain of command still matters. One mistake from you, and I'll be documenting it in excruciating detail." He walked away before she could respond, leaving the threat hanging in the air between them. Sophia took a deep breath, centering herself. Harrington was right about one thing. A single mistake today could end her career. The pressure was immense, but pressure was something she understood intimately. On the flight line, Phoenix waited, its distinctive silhouette standing out among the angular stealth fighters. As she performed her pre-flight checks, Sophia noticed the ground crew had worked through the night, ensuring every system was optimal. The jet might be older, but it was in perfect working order. The crew chief handed her the final inspection clipboard. "She's ready, Captain. Every system checked and double-checked." Sophia nodded her thanks, running her hand along the aircraft's fuselage. "We've got an important job today, old friend," she murmured. 20 minutes later, Eagle Flight was airborne, climbing through scattered clouds toward their operational area. The Nevada desert stretched below them, its vast emptiness the perfect backdrop for the combat theater about to unfold. "Eagle Flight, this is a WACS overlord," the controller's voice crackled over the radio. "Be advised, electronic warfare environment is active. Expect degraded communications and sensor anomalies beginning in 3 minutes." "Copy that, Overlord," Sophia responded. "Eagle Flight is proceeding to initial waypoint." She checked her formation. The 3 F-35s were positioned perfectly, maintaining precise distance. Harrington flew directly off her wing, his aircraft a deadly shadow mirroring her movements. "Eagle Flight, this is lead," Sophia transmitted. "As briefed, we'll maintain formation through the initial jamming zone. If communications degrade, follow visual signals. Questions?" "Just one," Harrington replied. "When our sensors start going haywire, what exactly is your antique jet bringing to the fight?" Sophia ignored the bait. "Eagle Flight, switch to combat spread. We're entering the jamming envelope now." The effects were immediate and dramatic. Warning lights flashed across her cockpit as her radar display filled with phantom targets. The radio crackled with static, communications becoming garbled and unintelligible. This was electronic warfare at its most sophisticated, designed not just to blind sensors, but to feed them false information. What happened next demonstrated the difference between 5th-generation dependence and 4th-generation resilience. The F-35 pilots, suddenly deprived of their advanced sensor fusion, struggled to maintain situational awareness. Their aircraft, designed to operate in networked environments, became isolated islands of technology fighting against digital deception. Sophia, however, had trained for this exact scenario throughout her career. While the F-35 was revolutionary in uncontested environments, the F-16 had evolved through decades of combating electronic warfare. Phoenix's systems were simpler but more resistant to certain types of jamming, and Sophia knew exactly how to interpret the partial information she was receiving. Eagle 3 and 4, adjust heading to 045, she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos enveloping them. Bandits approaching from the north, using terrain to mask their approach. My systems show nothing in that sector, one of the F-35 pilots protested. Trust me, Sophia replied, banking her F-16 toward the threat. They're there. Seconds later, 6 aggressor aircraft crested the ridgeline exactly where she'd predicted, launching a coordinated attack against the formation. The F-35 pilots, caught off guard by threats their systems hadn't detected, scattered in momentary confusion. All except Harrington, who stayed glued to Sophia's wing, watching her every move with predatory intensity. What followed was a masterclass in old-school fighter tactics. With advanced targeting systems compromised, the engagement devolved into the kind of visual range dogfighting that many had declared obsolete. This was Sophia's element, the raw, instinctive combat that relied more on the pilot's skill than the aircraft's technology. She rolled Phoenix into a tight turn, pulling enough G's to make her vision narrow, then reversed direction without warning. The maneuver caught the lead aggressor by surprise, giving her a perfect firing solution. In a real combat situation, he would have been destroyed instantly. Eagle 3, break right now, she called, spotting another threat diving on the formation. Captain Chun responded instantly, his F-35 narrowly avoiding simulated missile fire. The trust in her judgment was evident in his immediate reaction. No questions, no hesitation. For 15 intense minutes, Eagle Flight battled through the electronic maze, facing waves of aggressors while their own systems provided unreliable information. Throughout the chaos, Sophia led with a combination of technical knowledge and instinctive flying that kept her team alive when they should have been overwhelmed. Harrington remained unnervingly close, shadowing her every maneuver. He was flying brilliantly, she had to admit, matching her turn for turn despite the F-35's different handling characteristics. But his focus seemed split between the battle around them and her performance, like a predator waiting for the smallest mistake. That mistake came 50 minutes into the mission, as they approached the final objective. Sophia's radar briefly cleared, showing multiple contacts converging from the east, but something felt wrong about the pattern. Years of experience told her this wasn't a real threat, but a sophisticated electronic deception. She made a split-second decision to ignore the apparent threat and continue toward the objective. It was a calculated risk based on instinct rather than data. Eagle Flight, maintain course, she ordered. Disregard contacts at bearing 090, they're electronic ghosts. Negative lead, Harrington countered immediately. Multiple confirmed. Hostiles, all aircraft break east now. The contradiction of orders created momentary confusion. Chun and the other F-35 hesitated, caught between conflicting commands from their flight lead and the more senior officer. In that critical moment, Sophia's instincts proved correct. The eastern contacts disappeared as suddenly as they'd appeared. Phantom aircraft generated by the enemy's electronic warfare systems. Had they turned to engage, they would have exposed their vulnerable position to the real threat hiding in the western canyons. All aircraft, continue on assigned heading, Sophia reiterated firmly. Lieutenant Colonel, maintain formation discipline. It was a direct challenge to Harrington's attempt to override her command, necessary for the mission, but dangerous for her career. Through her canopy, she could see him flying just off her wing, close enough to make out his helmet. For a moment, she thought he might break formation in direct defiance of her orders. Instead, he maintained position, his voice cold when he responded, "Copy that lead." They completed the mission successfully, penetrating the electronic warfare envelope, identifying the simulated enemy command center. and destroying it before withdrawing through heavily contested airspace. Despite the jamming, despite the aggressor aircraft, despite the internal tension within their own flight, they accomplished every objective. When they landed back at Holloway, the debrief was unlike any Sophia had experienced. Colonel Wright herself presided, along with several visiting officers wearing Air Combat Command patches. This had been more than a training exercise. It had been an evaluation of tactics against an emerging threat. Outstanding performance, Eagle Flight. Colonel Wright began, reviewing the mission data on the main screen. Especially considering the electronic warfare environment was 30% more intense than what we initially briefed you on. Murmurs spread through the room. They'd been tested beyond what they'd been prepared for, deliberately pushed to failure point to see how they'd respond. Captain Reynolds, the colonel continued, your decision to ignore the phantom contacts at the final approach likely saved the entire mission. Can you walk us through your thought process? All eyes turned to Sophia. This was the moment Harrington had been waiting for, her justification for countermanding his order in flight. The contact pattern was too symmetric, she explained calmly. Real aircraft, even in formation, show slight variances in position. These contacts were mathematically perfect, a signature of artificially generated radar returns. She pulled up the radar recording on her tablet. Additionally, their approach vector aligned perfectly with the most obvious route to our objective. It felt like bait, too convenient, too visible. Colonel Wright nodded appreciatively. Instinct born from experience. Exactly what we were testing for. She turned to address the room. This is why mixed generations of aircraft and pilots remain valuable. Different perspectives, different vulnerabilities, different strengths. Harrington shifted in his seat, his expression unreadable. The colonel's praise of Sophia's performance was an implicit criticism of his attempt to override her command. After the formal debrief, as pilots filtered out of the room, Harrington approached Sophia. His face was tight with controlled emotion, his voice pitched low. Congratulations on your moment of glory, Reynolds. Enjoy it while it lasts. Sophia met his gaze steadily. This isn't about glory. It's about effectiveness. Don't pretend this is anything but political, he hissed. Command pushing their diversity narrative by promoting obsolete platforms and their pilots. One electronic warfare scenario doesn't change the fact that your F-16 is destined for the boneyard. Before she could respond, Colonel Wright approached. Ending their conversation, Captain Reynolds, a word? Harrington moved away, his parting glance promising that their conflict was far from over. The colonel guided Sophia to a quiet corner of the briefing room. You handled that situation exceptionally. Well, both the tactical challenge and the leadership challenge. Sophia nodded, choosing her words carefully. Thank you, ma'am. It was a complex scenario. I'm not just talking about the electronic warfare, Colonel Wright replied, her voice dropping. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington's behavior has been noted at the highest levels. His attempt to undermine your command today wasn't the first incident. Sophia remained silent, surprised that command was aware of the ongoing conflict. We've been watching this situation develop, the colonel continued. What you may not realize is that today's exercise wasn't just about testing tactics against electronic warfare. It was about evaluating leadership under pressure, including how certain officers respond when their technological advantages are neutralized. She handed Sophia a sealed envelope. These are your new orders, effective immediately. Don't open them until tomorrow morning. Sophia accepted the envelope, confusion evident in her expression. May I ask what this is about, ma'am? Colonel Wright's smile was enigmatic. Let's just say that sometimes the Air Force needs to be reminded that it's not the platform that wins wars. It's the person in the cockpit. Get some rest, Captain. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. That night, Sophia sat alone in her quarters, the unopened orders on her desk. Her thoughts were turbulent, replaying the day's events, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Whatever was in that envelope would change the trajectory of her career, for better or worse. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message from Chun. Word spreading about what happened today. Pilots are talking. Something big is happening tomorrow. Be ready. Sophia didn't reply. Instead, she found herself staring at her grandfather's photograph, wondering what he would make of all this. He'd flown in an era when pilots were celebrated for their skill rather than their technology, when the connection between human and machine was considered sacred. You don't fly to prove a point, he'd told her. But sometimes, proving a point became necessary when the alternative was surrender. She slept fitfully, waking before dawn. With steady hands, she opened the orders. That would determine her future. 10 minutes later, she was walking briskly across the base, purpose in every step. The flight line was quiet at this hour, with only essential personnel preparing aircraft for the day's operations. She found Chief Master Sergeant Garcia already at work on Phoenix, despite the early hour. "Morning, Captain," he greeted her. Wiping his hands on a rag, "You're up early." "New orders," she replied, handing him the maintenance authorization. "I need Phoenix ready by 0800. The chief scanned the document, his eyebrows rising. "Special demonstration flight, with General Hayes observing?" He whistled softly. "This is high visibility, Captain." "That's one way to put it," Sophia agreed, running her hand along the F-16's fuselage. "How's she looking?" "Best shape she's been in since leaving the factory," Garcia assured her. "We've been giving her extra attention since your performance yesterday. Word travels fast on a flight line." Sophia smiled gratefully. "I'll need everything she's got today, Chief." By 0730, pilots and senior officers were gathering at the observation point overlooking the main runway. The morning's schedule had been cleared for a special demonstration, details of which remained classified. Rumors spread like wildfire. Everything from a new weapons system test to the retirement announcement of the remaining F-16 fleet. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington arrived, his confusion evident when he saw Sophia in her flight suit. "Reynolds, what's going on?" "You're not on the flight schedule today." Before she could respond, Colonel Wright approached, accompanied by a 3-star general and several civilian officials in suits. "Lieutenant Colonel, good morning. I believe you've been briefed on today's demonstration?" Harrington straightened. "Yes, ma'am. My F-35 is prepped and ready." The colonel's smile was pleasant but firm. "There's been a change of plans. Captain Reynolds will be flying the first demonstration sortie this morning. You'll be observing with us." Harrington's expression darkened. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my F-35 is better equipped for any demonstration of Air Force capabilities." "That's precisely what we're here to determine," the general interjected, stepping forward. "I'm General Hayes, Air Combat Command. Today's exercise is designed to test a theory that's been gaining traction, that in certain scenarios, pilot skill can offset technological advantage." He gestured toward the flight line where both Sophia's F-16 and an F-35 were being prepared. "Captain Reynolds will fly her F-16 against our most advanced aggressor pilots in F-35s. We want to see firsthand how a supposedly obsolete platform performs when piloted by someone intimately familiar with its capabilities." Harrington's face flushed. "Sir, this isn't a fair comparison. The F-35 was designed for different mission parameters." "Which is exactly why this demonstration matters," General Hayes replied evenly. "We need to understand the true capabilities and limitations of our entire fleet, not just our newest acquisitions." As Harrington absorbed the implications, Sophia moved toward the flight line. This wasn't just a demonstration, it was a reckoning. Command was directly challenging the narrative that newer always meant better, that technology always trumped experience. 30 minutes later, Sophia sat in Phoenix's cockpit, running through her pre-flight checklist with methodical precision. Through her canopy, she could see the observation area filled with officers and officials, all watching intently. This was no longer about her conflict with Harrington. It had become a referendum on the future of air combat philosophy. "Phoenix, this is Control," the tower radioed. "Your aggressors are airborne. 4 F-35s with full combat loadout simulation. Rules of engagement are as briefed. First team to achieve mission objectives wins. No safety restrictions beyond standard. Protocols." Sophia acknowledged, then took a deep breath. 4 against 1, with the entire command structure watching. The odds were overwhelming by any standard. But as she taxied to the runway, a calm certainty settled over her. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about demonstrating a truth she'd always known, that the human element in warfare remained paramount. That experience and adaptability could sometimes overcome even the most advanced technology. "Phoenix cleared for takeoff," the tower announced. "Good hunting, Captain." Sophia pushed the throttle forward, feeling the familiar surge of power as Phoenix accelerated down the runway. Within seconds, they were airborne, climbing rapidly into the clear blue sky. Whatever happened next would change not just her career, but potentially the Air Force's approach to fighter development and pilot training. The engagement began 30 miles north of the base. 4 F-35s against her single F-16, in an unrestricted combat scenario designed to push both aircraft and pilots to their absolute limits. On paper, it was no contest. The F-35 stealth, sensor fusion, and networked capabilities should have made short work of her obsolete fighter. But combat rarely unfolds according to paper predictions. From the first engagement, Sophia leveraged every advantage Phoenix offered: superior maneuverability, better visibility from the cockpit, and simpler systems that were less vulnerable to electronic countermeasures. She flew aggressively, never staying predictable, forcing the F-35 pilots to respond to her instead of executing their carefully planned tactics. "Phoenix, bandit at your 6, Control warned as an F-35 maneuvered behind her. Sophia didn't panic. Instead of trying to outrun the more powerful F-35, she cut power and deployed air brakes, causing her pursuer to overshoot. Before he could recover, she had locked onto his aircraft with a simulated missile. "Splash 1, Control confirmed. Aggressor 1 is eliminated." The remaining F-35s adjusted their tactics, attempting to use their stealth capabilities to approach undetected. But Sophia had anticipated this, keeping her altitude low where ground clutter would compromise their stealth advantage. When they adjusted again, using their superior numbers to bracket her position, she dove into a narrow canyon where their sensors struggled to maintain lock. It became a chess match played at supersonic speeds, every move countered, every advantage neutralized by experience and creativity. One by one, the F-35s fell victim to tactics they hadn't trained against, scenarios their simulators hadn't prepared them for. Final aggressor eliminated, Control announced after 27 intense minutes. "Phoenix, return to base. Mission complete." As Sophia guided Phoenix back toward Holloway, she felt a profound sense of vindication. Not because she had defeated the F-35s. She understood perfectly well that in real combat, with real weapons, the outcome might have been different. But because she had proven her fundamental point, that the human element remained decisive, even in an age of increasing technological sophistication. When she taxied back to the flight line, she was surprised to find a crowd had gathered. Maintenance crews, pilots, even administrative personnel had come to witness her return. As she climbed down from the cockpit, the applause started, spontaneous and genuine. Colonel Wright approached, General Hayes beside her. "Outstanding demonstration, Captain," the general said, extending his hand. "You've given us a lot to think about." "Thank you, sir," Sophia replied, removing her helmet. Phoenix deserves most of the credit. I don't think so, the general disagreed. What we witnessed today wasn't about the aircraft, it was about the pilot, about experience, instinct, and adaptability. He gestured toward the gathered crowd. That's the lesson here. In our rush to embrace new technology, we sometimes forget that our greatest asset has always been our people. Lieutenant. Colonel Harrington stood at the edge of the group, his expression unreadable. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward. Captain Reynolds, he began formally. That was exceptional flying. The admission clearly cost him, but there was a new quality in his voice, if not quite respect, then at least recognition. Thank you, sir, Sophia replied simply. I still believe the F-35 represents the future. Harrington continued, but perhaps that future includes lessons from the past that I've been too quick to dismiss. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, the beginning of a potential bridge across the philosophical divide that had separated them. The general turned to address the gathered personnel. What we've witnessed today isn't about F-16 versus F-35. It's about remembering that technology is a tool, not a replacement for human skill and judgment. In our pursuit of advanced capabilities, we must never lose sight of the importance of the person in the cockpit. As the crowd dispersed, Chun approached Sophia with a grin. That was the most incredible flying I've ever seen. You've changed minds today, not just about the F-16, but about what makes a true fighter pilot. Sophia smiled, fatigue and exhilaration mingling as the adrenaline began to fade. One flight doesn't change everything, Chun, but maybe it starts a conversation we need to have. Later that afternoon, she found another envelope in her locker, this one bearing the Air Combat Command insignia. Inside was a formal invitation to join a new program called Legacy Integration, a specialized unit tasked with developing tactics that combine the strengths of both 4th and 5th generation fighters. The final paragraph caught her attention. Your demonstration today highlighted the continuing value of experience-based flying skills in an increasingly technology-dependent environment. We believe your perspective is essential as we develop the next generation of air combat doctrine. It wasn't just a new assignment, it was validation. Recognition that her approach to flying, her connection with her aircraft, represented something valuable that the Air Force couldn't afford to lose. As she walked across the flight line that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the tarmac, Sophia stopped to look at Phoenix. In the golden light, the F-16 didn't look obsolete at all. It looked timeless, a perfect expression of the balance between human and machine. Ready for tomorrow, old friend? She murmured, running her hand along the fuselage. We've still got work to do. The aircraft didn't respond, of course, but in that moment, Sophia could almost feel her grandfather's presence, his quiet pride in what she'd accomplished. Not just in outflying the F-35s, but in standing firm for what she believed, even when everyone told her she was wrong. You don't fly to prove a point, he'd always said. But sometimes, proving a point changed everything. 3 months after the demonstration flight that changed everything, the Pentagon's largest briefing room buzzed with quiet anticipation. Rows of uniforms filled the seats while a small press contingent waited at the back, cameras ready. Military officials from all branches sat in the front rows, alongside civilian defense analysts and aerospace industry representatives. They weren't gathered for a general or decorated admiral. They were all here for Captain Sophia Reynolds. Sophia sat backstage, reviewing her presentation one final time. Her dress uniform was crisp and perfectly pressed, the silver pilot wings gleaming above her left breast pocket. A new patch adorned her right shoulder, the emblem of the legacy integration unit, featuring silhouettes of both 4th and 5th generation fighters flying in formation. 5 minutes, Captain, a young lieutenant informed her, clearly starstruck. Sophia nodded, closing her tablet. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of changes. After her demonstration flight against the F-35s, she'd been temporarily assigned to Air Combat Command Headquarters, tasked with developing a comprehensive report on the continuing relevance of pilot skill in an increasingly automated battle space. What had begun as a simple report had evolved into something much more significant, a complete reassessment of fighter pilot training and tactical development. Today, she would present her findings to the highest levels of military leadership, with implications that would shape Air Force doctrine for years to come. At the podium stood General Elaine Winters, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the first woman to hold the position in the branch's history. She tapped the microphone, bringing the room to attention. "We often speak of air superiority in terms of technology," General Winters began. "Faster aircraft, better stealth, more advanced weapon systems. And these matter, make no mistake. But 3 months ago, a single demonstration flight forced us to reconsider a fundamental question. What truly determines victory in air combat?" The room grew even quieter. Captain Sophia Reynolds, flying an F-16 that first entered service before she was born, defeated 4 of our most advanced F-35s in simulated combat. Not through technological advantage, but through superior tactical awareness, creativity, and raw flying skill. General Winters gestured toward the side entrance, Captain Reynolds front and center. Sophia walked to the podium with measured steps, her posture perfect, her expression composed. As she took her position, she saw Lieutenant Colonel Harrington seated in the 3rd row. Their eyes met briefly, and to her surprise, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you, General," Sophia began, her voice steady and clear. 3 months ago, I flew a mission that many considered impossible. An obsolete fighter prevailing against aircraft designed to render it completely ineffective. Today, I want to explain why that mission succeeded, and more importantly, what it means for the future of air combat. She brought up her first slide, a comparison of the F-16 and F-35, highlighting the vast technological gap between them. The F-35 represents the pinnacle of modern fighter technology. Stealth, sensor fusion, networked battlefield awareness, capabilities that revolutionize air combat. By any objective measure, it should have dominated our engagement. She clicked to the next slide, video footage from her cockpit during the demonstration flight, showing her unconventional maneuvers and tactical decisions. But air combat isn't fought on paper. It's fought in a 3-dimensional battle space where adaptability often trumps technological advantage, where experience and instinct can sometimes overcome even the most sophisticated systems. For the next 30 minutes, Sophia detailed her findings, not as criticism of the F-35 program, but as an argument for balance between technological development and human skill. She presented data showing how over-reliance on advanced systems could create vulnerabilities when those systems were compromised. She demonstrated how traditional flying skills remained essential even in 5th-generation aircraft. The most dangerous pilot, she concluded, isn't the one with the most advanced aircraft. It's the one who truly understands their aircraft, its capabilities and limitations, and can adapt when technology fails. That's why we need both cutting-edge technology and old-school flying skills. Not one or the other, but both, working in perfect harmony. As she finished her presentation, the room erupted in applause, not polite, ceremonial clapping, but genuine, enthusiastic recognition. Even the most ardent F-35 supporters could see the wisdom in her balanced approach. General Winters returned to the podium. Based on Captain Reynolds' findings and subsequent analysis by Air Combat Command, we're announcing a major revision to our fighter pilot training program. Beginning next quarter, all pilots will receive enhanced training in basic fighter maneuvers and analog flying skills, regardless of their assigned aircraft. She paused, allowing the significance to sink in. Additionally, we're establishing a new integrated fighter tactics development center, combining the strengths of both fourth and fifth generation platforms. This center will ensure that as we develop the next generation of fighter aircraft, we don't lose the human skills that have made our Air Force the most formidable in the world. The general turned to Sophia. And Captain Reynolds will be its first director, with an immediate promotion to major. The announcement sent a ripple of surprise through the audience, followed by another round of applause. A junior officer being appointed to such a significant position was almost unprecedented. After the formal briefing, as the crowd began to disperse, Lieutenant Colonel Harrington approached Sophia. He seemed different, the arrogance that had defined him now tempered by humility. "Congratulations, Major," he said, extending his hand. "That was an exceptional presentation." Sophia accepted his handshake. "Thank you, Colonel. I owe you an apology," Harrington continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I was wrong about you, about the F-16, about what matters most in air combat." "We were both partly right," Sophia replied generously. "The F-35 is an incredible platform. We just need to ensure the pilots flying it have skills that go beyond its technology." Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "That's why I've requested assignment to your new center. If you'll have me, that is." Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. "You want to work under my command?" "I want to learn what you know," he answered simply. "Because the next generation of pilots deserves the best of both worlds, our technology and your skills." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a group of young lieutenants, newly graduated pilots eager to meet the woman who had changed Air Force doctrine through a single flight. "Major Reynolds," one of them asked excitedly, "is it true you used a vertical rolling scissors maneuver against an F-35? They told us at flight school that nobody does that anymore." Sophia smiled. "Sometimes the old moves work best when everyone's forgotten them. The key isn't knowing every maneuver, it's understanding when to use them." As she addressed their questions, Sophia noticed a distinguished older man watching from the edge of the crowd. In his 80s, with the bearing of a career military officer, he seemed vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place him. When the young pilots finally dispersed, the man approached. "Major Reynolds," he said, his voice strong despite his age. "Forgive the intrusion, but I had to meet you." "Not at all, sir," Sophia replied politely. "And you are?" "Colonel Thomas Blackwood, retired," he said, offering his hand. "I flew Phantoms in Vietnam with your grandfather." Sophia's eyes widened in recognition. "You knew my grandfather?" The old aviator smiled. "James Reynolds was my wingman for 2 tours. Best damn pilot I ever flew with. He saved my life more times than I care to remember." He studied her face. "You have his eyes. And from what I saw today, you fly like him too, by feel, not just by numbers." "You were watching my demonstration flight?" Sophia asked, surprised that a retired colonel would have access to such a restricted event. "I made some calls," Blackwood admitted with a wink. "When I heard that James Reynolds' granddaughter was shaking up the fighter community, I had to see it for myself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn, faded photograph, 2 young pilots standing in front of an F-4 Phantom, grinning with the invincibility of youth. "He'd be proud of you," Blackwood said, his voice softening. "Not just for your flying, but for standing your ground when it mattered." That was always his way too. Sophia touched the photograph gently, seeing her grandfather as a young man, so similar to herself at the beginning of his career. "The last time I saw him," Blackwood continued, "he told me about teaching his little granddaughter to fly. Sighed. You had a natural feel for aircraft that couldn't be taught. He knew even then that you were something special." Tears threatened at the corners of Sophia's eyes, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you for telling me that, sir. It means more than you know." Blackwood nodded, understanding the emotional impact of his words. "Your grandfather believed that the connection between pilot and aircraft was almost mystical, something beyond technology or training. Looks like he was right. As the old colonel departed, General Winters approached. Quite a day for you, Major. How does it feel to change Air Force doctrine before your 30th birthday? Sophia smiled. Overwhelming, ma'am. But in a good way. Get used to it, the general advised. What you've started here goes beyond tactical development. You've reminded an entire service that while technology evolves, the human element remains constant. That's a legacy that will outlast both of us. She handed Sophia a folder stamped with classified markings. Your first assignment as director. The preliminary design requirements for our next-generation fighter. I want your input before we proceed with prototyping. Sophia accepted the folder, recognizing the extraordinary trust being placed in her. I'll give it my full attention, ma'am. I know you will, General Winters replied. That's why you're the right person for this job. You understand what many have forgotten, that fighters are built to be flown by humans, not the other way. Around 6 months later, Sophia stood on the flight line at Edwards Air Force Base, watching as pilots prepared for the day's test missions. The Integrated Fighter Tactics Development Center had grown rapidly, attracting the best pilots from across the Air Force, including, surprisingly, Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, who had proven to be a valuable asset once he overcame his initial prejudices. Today marked a significant milestone, the first test flight of a new tactical concept that integrated 4th and 5th generation fighters into a complementary force package, leveraging the strengths of each to overcome their individual weaknesses. Major Reynolds, a voice called from behind her. The pilots are ready for final briefing. Sophia turned to find Captain Chen, now her deputy, tablet in hand. Thanks, Chen. How are they looking? Eager, he replied with a smile. Especially the F-35 pilots. They've been practicing those high-G maneuvers you developed until they're almost as good as you. Almost? Sophia teased. Chen laughed. Well, nobody expects miracles. Speaking of which, Harrington wanted me to tell you that the integration software is functioning perfectly. The F-16s and F-35s are communicating seamlessly. This was the centerpiece of their new approach, a system that allowed older fighters to receive targeting data from 5th-generation aircraft, while providing the F-35s with enhanced situational awareness from multiple perspectives. It effectively created a hybrid force greater than the sum of its parts. Excellent, Sophia nodded. Let's hope it holds up under combat conditions. The test mission that day exceeded even her most optimistic projections. The integrated force achieved a 90% success rate against a numerically superior aggressor squadron, demonstrating conclusively that 4th and 5th generation fighters working in concert could dominate the battle space more effectively than either could alone. As the pilots gathered for debriefing, the atmosphere was electric with excitement. They had witnessed the birth of a new combat doctrine, one that respected tradition while embracing innovation. The key takeaway, Sophia explained, reviewing the mission data, isn't just that the system worked technically. It's that it forced all of you to adapt your flying styles. F-35 pilots had to embrace more aggressive maneuvers, while F-16 pilots had to think beyond visual range. You each stepped outside your comfort zones and became more complete aviators as a result. Harrington, who had flown as mission commander, nodded in agreement. It's like you've been saying all along, Major. The platform matters, but the pilot matters more. Today proved that conclusively. Coming from him, this acknowledgement carried special weight. The man who had once been her most vocal critic had become one of her strongest supporters, not because she had defeated him, but because she had shown him a more effective way forward. That evening, Sophia found herself alone on the observation deck, overlooking the darkened flight line. Phoenix sat among the newer jets, its silhouette distinct but no longer out of place. In the moonlight, the differences between generations of fighters seemed less important than their shared purpose. Penny for your thoughts, Major? She turned to find General Winters approaching, still in her service dress despite the late hour. "Just appreciating the view, ma'am," Sophia replied. "There's something special about a flight line at night." The general stood beside her, gazing out at the aircraft below. "I used to feel the same way as a young pilot. Something almost sacred about it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before the general spoke again. The Secretary of Defense reviewed today's test results. He was impressed. "The team performed exceptionally," Sophia acknowledged. "It's more than that," General Winters continued. "What you've created here is changing how we think about air combat at the highest levels. The Chinese and Russians have been pursuing a similar integrated approach, but you've leapfrogged their efforts by at least 5 years." She turned to face Sophia directly. "Which brings me to why I'm here. The next generation air dominance program needs a new director, someone who understands both the technical requirements and the human element of fighter design. Someone who can ensure our future aircraft serve the pilots, not the other way around." Sophia's eyes widened as she grasped the implication. "MAAM, with respect, that position is typically filled by a full colonel with decades of experience." "Experience comes in many forms," the general replied. "What you've accomplished in 9 months would take most officers a decade. Sometimes perspective matters more than time in service." She handed Sophia another folder, this one bearing the presidential seal. "These are your new orders, effective immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds." The promotion, skipping the rank of major entirely, was almost unprecedented. A clear signal of how significantly Sophia had influenced Air Force thinking. "This is... I don't know what to say, ma'am." "Say you'll continue to shake things up," General Winters smiled. "Say you'll keep reminding us that technology is a tool, not a solution. Say you'll build us fighters that honor the connection between pilot and aircraft." Sophia straightened, accepting both the folder and the immense responsibility it represented. "I will, ma'am. You have my word." 2 years later, a sleek new aircraft rolled out of a hangar at Edwards Air Force Base, its lines representing a perfect balance between stealth requirements and aerodynamic performance. Designated the F-28 Phoenix, it incorporated lessons from both 4th and 5th generation fighters, designed from the ground up to augment pilot skill rather than replace it. As the project director, Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Reynolds had insisted on one non-negotiable requirement: the aircraft had to be controllable, even when its advanced systems were compromised. It had to allow pilots to fly by feel, by instinct, the way her grandfather had taught her. On the day of its first public flight demonstration, thousands gathered to watch the next evolution in fighter design take to the skies. Military officials, defense contractors, international observers, all eager to witness the aircraft that represented a philosophical shift in fighter development. Sophia, now responsible for overseeing the entire program, had insisted on piloting the demonstration flight herself. "If I'm going to ask other pilots to trust this aircraft with their lives," she had argued, "I should be willing to trust it with mine first." As she walked toward the F-28 in her flight suit, she passed Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, who would be coordinating the demonstration from the ground. "Just like old times," he commented with a smile. "You in the cockpit, me watching nervously from below." Sophia laughed. "With one important difference. This time we're on the same team." "We always were," he replied thoughtfully. "I just couldn't see it." The demonstration flight that day became legendary in Air Force circles. Sophia put the F-28 through maneuvers that displayed both its advanced capabilities and its fundamental controllability. She showed how it could fight at beyond visual range with its stealth and sensors, but also how it could dogfight with an agility that rivaled the F-16 when necessary. Most impressively, she demonstrated the aircraft's resilience by deliberately shutting down its advanced systems mid-flight, then completing a series of complex maneuvers using only basic controls, proving that even in a worst-case scenario, pilots could still fly and fight effectively. When she landed and climbed down from the cockpit, the applause was deafening. Pilots, engineers, even the normally stoic test flight directors, all recognized that they had witnessed something revolutionary. General Winters approached, beaming with pride. "You've done it, Colonel. You've created an aircraft that honors the past while embracing the future." "We've done it," Sophia corrected, including her entire team in the achievement. This was never about one person or one perspective. It was about finding the right balance. Later that day, as the crowds dispersed and the technical teams began their post-flight analysis, Sophia found herself alone with the F-28. She ran her hand along its fuselage, feeling the connection that had defined her career, that intimate understanding between pilot and aircraft. She thought about her grandfather, about the lessons he'd taught her decades ago in a small Cessna over the Arizona desert, about trusting her instincts when technology failed, about respecting the fundamentals of flight that no computer could fully replace. "What do you think, Grandpa?" she whispered. "Did I get it right?" The aircraft didn't answer, of course, but as the setting sun cast golden light across its wings, Sophia felt a profound sense of completion. She had done more than design a new fighter or advance her career. She had ensured that future generations of pilots would fly aircraft built to complement human skill rather than replace it. In doing so, she had changed not just the Air Force's approach to fighter development, but its fundamental philosophy about the relationship between humans and technology. And that legacy would outlast any aircraft, any career, any single achievement. A young lieutenant approached hesitantly, clearly awed to be addressing the legendary Colonel Reynolds. "Ma'am, the Secretary of the Air Force has arrived. He'd like to speak with you about the Phoenix program." Sophia nodded, taking one last look at the F-28 before turning away. "Tell him I'll be right there." As she walked across the tarmac, pilots from across the base stopped to salute, not just out of military courtesy, but out of genuine respect for what she represented. In a world increasingly dominated by technology, she had reminded them of an essential truth, that the human spirit, properly trained and unleashed, remained the most powerful force in warfare. The F-28 Phoenix would soon enter production, eventually replacing both the F-16 and F-35 in Air Force inventory. But its greatest contribution wouldn't be measured in speed or stealth or weapons capacity. It would be measured in the confidence of the pilots who flew it, knowing that beneath all its advanced systems was an aircraft designed first and foremost to be flown by human hands. 6 months after the successful demonstration, Sophia stood at a podium in the Air Force Academy, addressing the newest class of pilot candidates. Before her sat hundreds of young men and women at the beginning of their careers, eager to fly the next generation of combat aircraft. "The F-28 you'll someday fly represents the cutting edge of fighter technology," she told them. "But the most important lesson I can share isn't about technology at all. It's about faith in your own abilities when everything else fails." She gestured toward the massive photograph behind her, the F-28 Phoenix silhouetted against the sunrise during its first flight. This aircraft was designed with a simple philosophy, that the pilot matters more than the platform. That human judgment, creativity, and adaptability remain our greatest advantages in combat. That no matter how advanced our systems become, the connection between pilot and aircraft can never be replaced. Looking out at their young faces, Sophia saw the future of air combat, a generation that would benefit from both cutting-edge technology and timeless flying skills. A generation that would never have to choose between tradition and innovation, because she had shown how they could coexist and reinforce each other. They called her ancient fighter obsolete, Sophia concluded, referencing her own journey. But What they failed to understand was that the true measure of an aircraft isn't its age or its technology. It's what a skilled pilot can accomplish with it. Remember that lesson, and you'll be ready for whatever challenges await you in the skies. As the cadets rose in standing ovation, Sophia felt the circle complete. From a young girl learning to fly in her grandfather's Cessna, to a captain defending her obsolete F-16, to a colonel designing the future of air combat, her journey had always been guided by a single principle, that the human element in warfare could never be obsolete. And as long as pilots flew with that understanding, the skies would belong to those who honored both the science and the art of flight, the technology and the touch, the platform and the pilot, working together in perfect harmony. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us